Hey everybody, Shoes here, back again with another episode. Hope you're all keeping well. I'm gonna probably make this one a bit shorter. The last one didn't upload in a quality that I was happy with, so I'm gonna try and shorten them down. So I'm not sure how long this episode 3 is gonna be, but it could be in multiple parts. But I'm gonna try to keep them to about a half an hour. So jumping back into where we were looking at the history and the mythology of Ireland from the point of view of the mud flood theory. We are looking at the mounds, the underground complexes that are all over Ireland, particularly in the Boyne Valley area and Moytura in Mayo. We're looking at the masonry, we're looking at the bridges, we're looking at the buildings, we're looking at star forts, we're looking at roads, we're looking at walls. We're looking at the masonry and investigating the level of buriedness of a lot of masonry. There's a lot of masonry under the ground, as we saw in episode 1. There's a full star fort buried in Tir Crone in County Meath. We looked at that in episode 1. And we're looking at some old maps, and we're looking at the new map. So today we've extended our conversation into Mayo. So we started here in the Boyne Valley in episode 1, and then we moved to Moytura here. So we pick up the story of two races inhabiting the island of Ireland: the Fir Bolg, who settled here, and Sláine cut down all the trees in Brunabona. And then they were invaded by a group called the Tuatha De Danann, and there was a gigantic battle over here in Moytura. And Moytura is an area like the Boyne Valley that has a lot of mounds. There's a lot of masonry covered in mud, and there's a lot of mythology and stories that we're discussing in this series. So let's pick it up again, and we're going to take a look at this map here. We're going to start. This is the map of Ireland that I have on the front of the presentation. And it's going to be focused on this area here today. This is where we're looking at. This is the area here. So Drogheda is here. No, Drogheda is here. Apologies. And the Boyne comes down here. I think this is Navan, and it comes down to Trim, and around here Carbery is down here somewhere. And the Boyne also follows off to the Yellow River over here, which we'll see. We're also going to take note of this river here. This is the River Barrow nowadays, but I'll show you in a moment a map that shows that the River Barrow and the River Boyne were once the same river. So you can see they're very close to each other here, the Barrow and the Boyne. So this is the area of the Boyne anyway. And we're going to start to look at that again. So the area of the Fir Bolg, this is where the Fir Bolg settled when they came to Ireland. Sláine. But before we do that, we're going to just remind ourselves of some buried mounds and what a mound looks like and what can be under mounds. And when we're looking at Ireland and the landscape of Ireland, we just need to look at it with this freshness of eyes of what is under the mounds themselves. So this is just one mound. These are in Mexico, from Wise Up's channel. I just took a couple of screenshots. Hope he doesn't mind. He does some great work. Check him out, Wise Up. Fantastic. This pyramid here, this area, you can see it's just all grass and mud, big masonry under the ground. So masonry under the ground is one of the themes of my presentations in Buried Ireland. Masonry that is buried for no good reason. Large scale masonry. Big, not just small, a couple of cranogues, like star forts, big as 100 houses in scale, you know. They label these geological formations, these mounds. We're going to look at something called drumlins in Mayo, and we'll see in probably in one of the later parts that Mayo, Clew Bay has a lot. It's I think it's the best known example of drowned drumlins. So essentially drowned mounds. So if you put a load of water on those, you would be left with drowned mounds. And what's under these mounds? What's under the drumlins? So the drumlins in Clew Bay are beside where the Battle of Moytura took place, which we're going to go back into again and just re-remind ourselves of the environment of Ireland at the time in a moment, because it is quite complex and difficult to get the head around. And we're also going to start to unravel as to whether there was that many people, there was that many races here, or are they actually the same race but repeated over again? Because the tales, we'll talk about that later. Anyway, here's some more mounds with some pyramids under them. Here you go again, big gigantic pyramid. And then let's just not forget Egypt and sand. So it's not just mud. Sand is also what is, sand is the other material that is covering large scale masonry. So we know from Egypt that if you remove a lot of the sand, what you see underneath, you see full cities completely buried. So we're going to move along. And this is Leinster. Okay. So as part of the map that we looked at a moment ago, Drogheda is down here. Where's Drogheda? We'll find it. We're going to zoom in. So Drogheda is, this is Drogheda over here. So Drogheda is over here. And the River Boyne runs down here. This is Carbery here, as we can see. Carbery, big castle, big cathedrals, big technology, spires, lots of spires in all these areas. So we can see here that there's the same at Trim. We're going to look at Trim in a moment. Trim Castle is another ruin, absolutely devastated. Athboy of today, I would say. And this is where the Boyne Canal begins. This is Old Bridge. This is the Battle of the Boyne area here. This is where that battle took place, Old Bridge. If it comes around, this is where you have Bruna Boyne, then is this area here. I think Bruna Boyne is there. We'll reconfirm it in a moment anyway. This is our big cathedral that we looked at in episode 1 in the middle of Drogheda. We don't have any aqueduct here or viaduct. There's no viaduct in this map. And that's this area. So we're going to map the two of them onto each other and have a look at it a bit more closely in a minute. But this is where the Fir Bolg, this is where they built. We're going to attribute this to the Fir Bolg as they were the original builders who cleared the forests. So if they were attributing clearing the forest, I'm attributing the building of the structures to them if they're the original clearers of the forest. Here's Kildare. So that is the River Boyne. We've got Navan here, and Slane we're going to look at in more detail. Slane is a very, very important part of Irish history. This is where Sláine, the Fir Bolg giant, the first High King of Ireland, is said to be buried in a mound, and we're going to look at that mound, and we're going to look at the abbey that's on top of the hill. And Abbeys is going to be another area that we look at in episode 3. Abbeys are destroyed all over the country, and they are some of the finest examples of architecture that you will ever find, supposedly built by monks. Hilarious. So that is the background of this area, and we're going to make our way today. Hopefully, we're going to get Slane done, and we might make our way up to Navan. I was hoping, like in this episode 3, we're also going to make our way back over to Moytura in Mayo, but we're going to focus on this area for episode 3 for the moment, and we're going to introduce some new characters into the story, some characters from the Tuatha De Danann and characters from the Fomorians will start to encounter as well, and we'll try to put the tale of Irish mythology together a bit better, and it will hopefully come together as we continue to discuss it. So as I was saying to you a moment ago, the River Boyne in this map flows all the way down from here. This is Carberry, this is where it traditionally stops, and then this is where the Barrow traditionally begins, in and around here. So the Barrow goes through Carlow and empties out through Waterford. That's the Barrow, so traditionally that's the River Barrow, and then there's the Boyne, and the Boyne also scoots off here as well. And the Yellow River, see, I said this is the end of the Boyne here, is it? But there's a river called the Yellow River that pops up in modern times, which we'll also see shortly. So very cool map, very interesting. You could spend all day. Here's all the mountains that they had left. So are these the ends of the giant trees that was left? As you can see, Meath was cleared. So this is the area of Meath, and it was totally cleared. So were they looking for resources? Because there was a lot of the wars, this is something I'm going to propose, is that it was likely resource based primarily. So like the wars seem to happen from the people over here who are so the Fir Bullocks were originally here, and then they got pushed back over to here. And then the Tuatha De Danann came in here, and then they had a battle with the Fomorians over here. So the battles, the bottom of Ireland seems to be completely a different world almost as from the top. So it'll be interesting as the story develops to see how the south, and obviously we've got the north of Ireland, which is the Ulster. So we're talking earlier than all the tales of the Fianna here. So Cuchulainn and Fionn McCool, who are also meant to be giants, actually. And there's stories where maybe even those stories of the Fianna are overlaid. Maybe the Fianna are the Tuatha De Danann. Maybe the Fir Bolg are the Fomorians. So we're going to investigate this as we go along, because the writers of history and mythology have tended to rewrite the stories over and over again. And maybe that's because they're just coming from different areas and different people are giving it different names. But it's all the same people, but being referred to as a different name, which is common in mythology, as you'd be aware. So this was Dublin. We're not going to look at Dublin because it's not part of the presentation. We're talking about the Boyne and the Boyne Valley. And so I reckon there was the battles they were going on with mining. We're also going to look at the names of some places, Kill, and what that means. And we're just going to carry on there now. Stay on that map all day. I'm just so caught for time. It's probably going for God knows how long already. It's probably 10 minutes in. So let's remind ourselves here, the first High King of Ireland was the Fir Bolg named Sláine. The Fir Bolg were one of the warrior races who inhabited Ireland before Celtic tribes. Sláine was said to have cleared the land at Brúna for the construction of the great Tumuli of Newgrange, North and Douth. When he died, he was buried in the great mound on top of the hill overlooking the Boyne Valley, which is named Slane in his honour. As a consequence of his abilities and his good deeds, A well on the hill was said to have the power to restore the dead and heal the wounded. So this is extremely important here because when we're talking about Slane, this well here is going to play a big role in the next couple of in the next piece of conversation, the next discussion that we have about this area. So the well is said to be on the hill of Slane, and it was a magical healing well. And these healing wells existed. There's one over in Mayo as well, and it plays a part of the story. And it links in with the story of St. Patrick as well, because St. Patrick lit a fire on Slane Hill, as you might remember from the last presentation. And was he looking for the well? Because also he did the same thing in Mayo, would you believe? So St. Patrick is split between Slane and Mayo, Tara and Mayo. His stories are also mirroring the stories of the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fair Bullock. But these remain centres. Whatever was going on, these are important centres for the power of the country, by the looks of it. So we're going to go down, we're going to drop down into modern day Slane. Oh, Slane. The course of the Boyne looks quite different as well, I must say, than it used to be. It does look slightly different. I wouldn't say much different. So Slane is around here somewhere. Where's Slane? Also, something I'm going to talk about today, or at some stage, is that these quarries definitely mirror lochs and lakes. You know, it cannot be dismissed that the lakes and the lochs, because there's stories of them being mined in the mythology. I don't have any today, but they're just filled up. I mean, if you see modern quarries with lakes in them, you know, cannot be dismissed at all. And then bogs, if you add in, like, a bog is, as we'll see later on in the presentations, I don't know when I'll get to it, but there's a bog called Loch Dee or Loch Dean, I can't remember, but it's a bog lake, and it looks like there's a star fort around it as well. It's very interesting. But quarries, bogs, and lakes, what was going on, and they're all destroyed then, as we're going to see in this. So let's get to Slane. Let's get to Slane. I know I'd be trying to speed them up, but what can you do, you know? So, Hill of Slane. This is where Slánna was buried. We looked at this area the other day as potentially the area where he was buried. I don't know if this was where he was buried, or if it's there, but that's the way the story goes. There's a destroyed castle here as well. Just remember that. Slane Castle, all over here. So large, heavy infrastructure all around here. And then we're going to go up here to the Abbey, because this is where St. Patrick would have been hanging out. And let's see. I'm going to pull in. So this is the Hill of Slane. This is where we are. And, like, once again, big thick walls, you know, heavy masonry. Like, this is big stuff. Like, look at this. It's all, remember again, all the landscape covered in 6 to 12 feet of mud and dirt. So that's Slánna, son of Della of the Fair Bullock, who was the legendary first High King of Ireland. Slane is named after him. Cleared the forest of Brunabona. Fair Bullock invaded Ireland with 5,000 men. Slánna and his 4 brothers, who were descended from the sons of Nemed, once again remember that, the sons of Nemed, they divided Ireland amongst them. Gan, Sengen, Gannon, Rudruga. And these guys all ended up being the next kings. They didn't rule for that long, apparently. Like 40, 50 years is what the stories say. And there seems to have been 2 factions of the Fair Bullock. And we're also going to have to consider at this stage, are the Fair Bullock also another crowd called the Fomorians? So they are put forward as two different races, but maybe they are actually the two different Fair Bullock races. Maybe they are the Galone. So there is another one, I think, Baron Galenga. So the other guys, so the Galone and we'll see them in a minute. But there's two variants of the Fair Bullock. So are the Fomorians one variant of it? Because the Fair Bullock and the Fomorians, they seem to be very interchangeable in their stories and their lineages and their relationships. But we're going to just have a little look here, and we're going to see the hill of Slane. So this area, you've got a big graveyard. We've got heavy masonry here. And this is where St. Patrick lit the Paschal fire. Look at this. What's this thing? Probably nothing. So you can see it's a very flat plain in this area. We've got a mound here. Is that a mound? So consider all of this area is covered heavily, and that's sloping down there. So you could certainly have a complex under here. I would be saying that a lot of these are the tops of the complexes. I mean, look at that. That's just up to its neck in dirt, you know? I mean, if you removed all that dirt there, what are you seeing underneath it? And then you've got like this is sloping down over here. These are all trees, but you could have plenty of mounds in this area. That's sloping all the way down there. I mean, you could have a gigantic star fort under there and you wouldn't even know it, you know? I mean, even looking at like lines, you could probably end up making out the shapes, but we're not going to do that because once again, there's just too many shapes to be considering. But this area, this was an important area for some reason. This was where Slán is buried. This is where St. Patrick came. This is where the River Boyne passed through, and it was a hill of importance in Ireland. So the Fair Bullock were based in this area, and we're going to give them I'm going to give them the credit for putting together most of this infrastructure. And I'm going to consider the possibility in this series of videos that there were giant trees, bigger trees than now, that were cut down in order to develop this infrastructure. I don't know if this is for sure true, but this is just the working theory of the model as we investigate for evidence to back it up. So remembering as well, we've got the canal, the Boyne Navigation Canal is running along this area as well. And it is, look at this here, what is this? You know, and then you've got this here in the middle of it. It's just also odd. The shapes. What way are we pointing here now? What way are we pointing here now? So we've got the Hill of Slane.
Ow! It's afternoon now. Off me.
So where's the bearings here? The Hill of Slane, like this is an interesting shape here as well. It's just also sharp. You could just spend so much time finding triangle shapes here. It's all triangle shapes. All triangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue on with a little bit of, oh, actually, do you know what we're going to do? we're going to go down here quickly to the Hill of Slain. We're going to pull out our little. I forgot we've got a couple of pictures all along here. It's fantastic. We don't even need pictures. Just quickly pull up some pictures here. So like this is it again. You've got a graveyard here. Like what were these graves like? If you're considering that this is mud flooded, all of these are actually boxes. They're often red brick, in fact, and they go 6 feet plus under the ground. So these would all have been standing up straight above the landscape for some reason. What was in them, I don't know what was in them. But were they originally used for placing the dead in, or was their original function something different? And it's just such heavy masonry. And like here, like what was going on? It's almost like it was a factory of some sort. I've put forward the notion that maybe it was a processing. So, like, if you're processing a lot of minerals, or so if you're doing a lot of mining, you need to process all of that. And in the processing of the mining, you have vats, and if you have everything underground, so imagine that all of these are fed from below. So there's something below the ground underneath that is feeding each of these vats here. And you could have anything in it, any type of metal or mineral. I mean, obviously, that world that was devastated, they seemed to know an awful lot about metallurgy, and they were highly advanced in that regard. Um, so you've got to ask yourself, so all of the abbeys were destroyed as well. Were they defensive posts? So if all of the abbeys were destroyed and all of the castles were destroyed along the main rivers, what was going on there? And why was like even abbeys in the cities were destroyed, but like churches and cathedrals survived? And I know that mainstream history would say it's the time frame and it's different, but I'm looking at this from a more practical, logical perspective in that these structures here, I don't believe that the narrative that I'm told is correct. So I'm trying to piece together a story where all of the limestone buildings fit together and all of the designs, which are all common, fit together. And it's clear to me that the worlds of these abbeys coexisted with the worlds of the churches and also with the Greco-Roman buildings, and possibly as well with even like all of the underground mounds are remnants. Like maybe we just can't see some of the stuff here. Like when I look, we're just short of a couple of mounds. It's just too thick. Maybe if you looked over here, maybe there could be a few more mounds. If it was a little bit shallower, I mean, look at this little heads. Look at the detail. Um, Big stones. That looks like it goes underground, or maybe not. Um, but absolutely majestic. Look at this here. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So that's the Hill of Slain. The Hill of Slain. Oh look, it's old St. Patrick, the man himself. Somebody he lost his hands though. There's a chimney. Oftentimes you can find that some of these buildings, they look like decrepit old castles, but if you added a couple of chimneys and a few columns, you end up with like a Greco-Roman building or a Gothic cathedral or something like that. So we are going to continue, and so we're going to say that the Fear Bullocks were in charge of this area. And they ruled for a period of, I don't know how many years. We'll get it up here. We're going to remind ourselves of the first battle of Mag Turret, or Moytura. So Moytura is the place on that map opposite in Mayo that I pointed out at the beginning of this. Um, so the Battle of Moytura relates, which we related in the last episode, in episode 2, how the Tuatha Dé Danann attacked the Fir Bolg who inhabited the island. Um, and the story begins: the children of Nemed, an earlier group of inhabitants, they left Ireland for Greece to escape their oppression by the Fomorians. So we spoke briefly about the Fomorians in the last episode as well. And the Fomorians are the people of the sea people. Um, so it looks like from this story, it says that the Fir Bolg are the Nemedians. So they're the same people as the people of Nemed. I'm not going to go into the people of Nemed right now. And they left Ireland because they were oppressed by the Fomorians. So we have to consider that the Fir Bolg, or the Nemedians, they could potentially have been the Fir Bolg, and they split into the two Fir Bolg factions that we have. We spoke of them briefly there earlier in the video, you might remember. So the Fir Bolgs had two wings of it. We don't know a lot about them, but we know that there was two of them. So is there a possibility that the Fir Bolg split and that the one group became the Fomorians, or the Fomorian Fir Bolgs, and the other group became the Fir Bolgs? So they were the Nemedians, one became the Fomorians, one became the Fir Bolgs. That's just what I'm considering in my mind as well, because the Fir Bolgs are the Nemedians. But they did come back to Ireland for a second time. And when they came back to Ireland, it seems that the Fomorians left them alone, and they took Ireland and they felled the trees in Brunabona and built the infrastructure. And they ruled for 30 years until the coming of the Tuatha Dé Danann, another group of Nemed's descendants. So the Tuatha Dé Danann are also said to be descended from the Nemedians. So is there a potential that it looks like they could all be descended from Nemed? So the Fir Bolg were happy and ruling away, and then came along the Tuatha Dé Danann. And the Tuatha Dé Danann are a race that we discussed earlier as well, and that was Boann, who was the goddess of the River Boyne, and she had a son called Angus with the Dagda. This is Angus here. So that is the son of Boann and the Dagda. And they were Tuatha Dé Dananns. But the Dagda was also part Fomorian because his father was a man called Elaha. And they descended from a guy called Dela. Anyway, so this is Angus, the Tuatha Dé Danann, son of the River Boyne goddess Boann. This is Boann, the River Boyne goddess. And here's another one of her. These are just artistic renditions. This is from a book, and this is so the mother of Lugla and the father of Lugla. She was a Fomorian and he was a Tuatha Dé Danann. So it really seems like there's not much of a muchness between the two of them. But these races had a bitter battle with each other constantly for some reason. Was it over resources? Is that the reason? Um, so we're going to carry on from Slane, up the River Boyne, where we remember that we go through Brunabona, which is over here. So Brunabona is just before Slane. This is where the Tuatha De Danann then moved in over here. So after the first battle of Moytura, which we discussed in the last episode, which took place in Mayo, the Fir Bolg were defeated by the Tuatha De Danann. And then the Tuatha De Danann ended up fighting with the Fomorians, and the Fir Bolg just seemed to disappear or became absorbed with the Fomorians. There's very little else spoken of them apart from references. Interesting as we're on Slane is that during the second battle of Moyturrid, which we're going to talk about in a later episode, the Fomorians filled in the magic well on the hill of Slane with their stones in order to stop Dean Cacht, the Tuath's god of physicians, bringing their warriors back to life. So the well on Slane, at the top of Slane, which we looked at, so that hill of Slane well had the power to bring warriors back to life again. And after the Fir Bolg lost the kingship of Ireland, it seems that they actually continued to live on in the area, which we're going to see in a minute. The Fir Bolg all didn't emigrate over to Connacht, as is the common tale. But it seems that the Fir Bolg and the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians all coexisted together, and there was good factions and bad factions of them. But this episode of the tale we will discuss in the next part of probably episode 4 of the second battle of Moytura, and we're going to look at the plains of Moytura where that second battle took place. So interesting, very interesting altogether. And to give an idea, so the Fir Bolg were here for 30 odd years in this area, and there was like 6 or 7 kings. Fogben, there was Rinal, Fiacha, Rudriga, Macdella. Interesting here to note is that Rudrig was the name of 2 other figures from Irish mythology. One, the son of Partholon, who led the first settlement of Ireland after the flood. So that's with Césaire. No, that's after the flood. So Césaire was before the flood. Partholon was after the flood. And there's another Milesian king. So the Milesians came after, they ended up here after the Tuatha De Danann. So these people were called Rudrig again. So then once again we have to ask, are the Partholonians the Fir Bolg who led the first settlement of Ireland after the flood? And also I have in my mind that the flood, that there was a time of heavy development before the flood, and then there was a flood, and then there was a cleanup after the flood. Was there more building? Was there more building again after the flood? I'm not sure. Was there multiple floods? Maybe there was. Was there multiple? It would make sense that there was not that many though. I mean, it takes a while to recover from a full reset. So these are the final, the Fir Bolgs. These are the Fir Bolg kings of Ireland, the High Kings of Ireland, the Fir Bolg High Kings, who ruled from Tara. So Sláine was the first guy to set up kinship at Tara. And it came down to the end. So Iachud MacEirc, he is the final Firbolg king, final Firbolg high king, and all the Firbolgs were overthrowing each other. I didn't go into each one of those little stories there. You can read them in your own time if you want to pause it. But all of those Firbolgs, they were all overthrowing each other over and over again. And most of them, they were apparently brothers. All came from Dela. So the original Firbolg is a guy called Dela. And that's where these guys all descended from. Dela is also is similar to Del Beth, Dealbaeth, who seems to be the progenitor of the Fomorians. I've managed to piece together with great flipping difficulty. So there's another common link that Dela and Delbath, so Dela being the progenitor or the father of Slana and most of the Firbolg, and Delbath being the father of Elaha and most of the Fomorians. And both of these races then interbred with the Tuatha De Danann. But anyway, Ichud MacGurk was the final king of the Firbolgs, the final high king of the Firbolgs, and he was the reigning king who was in charge when the Tuatha De Danann invaded. So in Irish mythology, Ichud, son of Orc, son of Rennell, of the Firbolg, became High King of Ireland when he overthrew Fog Ben. Fod, yeah, some name. He was the first king to establish a system of justice in Ireland. No rain fell during his reign, only a dew, and there was a harvest every year. Sounds lovely. His wife was the goddess Taltu. This is going to be interesting. His wife was the goddess Taltu. Rochad named his capital after her, modern Teltown, County Meath. So Teltown, we're going to look at that there in a moment. We're right beside Teltown, near Slane. And he held a festival there every August. And this festival was similar to the Olympic Games. It was called the Talta Festival, and we'll see later that it was patronaged. Anyway, Lug Lavada, one of the gods of Ireland, kept it going. As Taltu was Lug's foster mother as well. So that's a lot to take in there now, I know, and there's lots of names, and hopefully it'll start to become clear in time. So Ichud, last king of the Firbolgs, had a wife who was the goddess Taltu. And her area was a place called Teltown. So as we come along here, we come past Slane, along here. This canal, the Boyne Canal, is running all along here as well, remember. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And we come to Navan. And we know that Navan's got a nice, we don't know actually, we're going to look at it now. Navan's got some nice masonry in there. Teltown is up here. This is Teltown. Near Kells, the Book of Kells is a very famous book. We're not going to look at that today, but Kells is a very pivotal place in Irish mythology and monastic times particularly. But this is Teltown, the area of Teltown. So we'll have a quick look at Teltown. So Taltu, the wife of Ichud, last king of the Firbolg, Teltown was her spot. So this is Teltown. It looks very unassuming altogether. You could spend a million years making shapes out of all the points. You've got the River Blackwater here. So the River Blackwater is a tributary of the Boyne, I assume. It is. So the River Blackwater, you've got a large quarry here. So once again, quarrying, a little bit of quarrying. It's amazing to see it from above, I must say. So Teltown, this is where Taltu, the goddess Taltu, and I was trying to find some images just to keep it add a bit of freshness there. Doug was telling me. A couple of images are nice, and they are nice. I know that it's heavy with all the maps and the writing, so an old image is nice. So this is Taltu. This is the modern Taltu. That the only Taltu image I could find online. Uh, I don't know where it comes from, some sort of an anime game, but I wouldn't be surprised if the old school Taltu, as a modern nature goddess, had some pretty kick-ass powers. So Taltu, goddess of Ireland and mother of I don't know who she's mother of actually. We're going to probably look at her there in a minute. I presume I have a little blurb on Taltu. So this is the area anyway, Teltown. Was I just reading a blurb on Taltu? I was reading a blurb on Ucked. Ah, yeah. I hope I have a blurb on Taltu. We're going to go back to him again anyway. So he named his capital after her and held a festival there every August. He ruled for 10 years until the Firbolg were defeated by the Tuatha Dé Danann in the First Battle of Moytura, which we discussed in the last episode. During the fighting, Ucked was overcome by thirst, but the druids of the Tuatha hid all sources of water from him. That's one of the stories. As he searched for water, he was found and killed by the Morrigan. And the Morrigan is going to be, it's a triple goddess, Bab, Eru, and Fola. Three daughters of Elaha, the Fomorian king. So daughters of Elaha with, oh, what's her name? Ermis. I think it's Ermis. I've got it on slides anyway. It will come out at some stage in the presentation. But Ermis, I think, was a Firbolg. And anyway, the Morrigan, badass triple goddess, like also very similar to oh no, it's actually Morrigan in Irish, but the Morrigan is the anglicized equivalent, also from like King Arthur's tales. The Morrigan, Arthur and Morrigan, I think was her name. And apparently he's buried in Ucky's Cairn, which is over in Mayo, um, where we were the other day. So, seeing as I know we're talking about Mayo a lot, so we're just going to remind ourselves of where Mayo is and the equivalent spots of where all this adventure was happening. So, Ucked was based in this area, and they had a battle over here with the Tuatha Dé Danann when the Tuatha Dé Danann invaded over here in this plain. So, the first battle happened down here, and the Firbolg lost, and the Tuatha Dé Danann then became the rulers of Ireland. But the Firbolg continued to inhabit this area here because Taltu, who is the wife of Ucked, who we were just discussing, this chap here, the wife of Ucked, she became the foster mother of Lug Lavada. And Lug Lavada is a Tuatha Dé Danann Fomorian descent who was being fostered by a Firbolg mother. We're going to go more into Lug in a moment. But it's a very unusual scenario. So the former Queen of Ireland, she loses her queenship, and then Nuada becomes the King of Ireland, which we'll discuss in a moment, after a big battle over here. So the big battle happened here for some reason. And what we're propositioning is there's actually gigantic infrastructure all in this area here. And we're going to discuss in the later episodes what was happening over here, what's hidden under here. And we're going to see that there's an awful lot of destroyed infrastructure here. And we're also going to see that there's a whole section of Ireland missing from here, which I didn't even point out. But that map, you can see that there's a section here. Killala Bay, very famous place in Ireland. So that is where the story will continue in the next part. We're going to stop our tale by remembering that the Firbolgs were defeated at the first battle of Moytura, and then we're going to continue our tale with a bit more discussion about the Tuatha De Danann, and also we're going to introduce a bit more about the Fomorians, and we're going to discuss the battles that took place here and what was really going on in all this area with the lochs and the lakes. So I hope you enjoyed, and have a good weekend and think good thoughts. See you in the next part.